The world is a beautiful but challenging place to live. And let's face it, life hits hard sometimes. So if you find your hopes and dreams and mental well-being needs a boost, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to Inspire Us with your host, J. Paul Nadeau, a former hostage negotiator turned motivational speaker and acclaimed author of Take Control of Your Life. And now, here's your host, J. Paul Nadeau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inspire Us. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to someone who was convicted of murder and spent 22 years in jail. And he did commit the murder. It was a gang-related murder. But the story doesn't end with my guest going to jail. In fact, an amazing transformation happened several years into his sentence. And here to tell you about that transformation is my guest, Quan Huynh. And he just might change your mind as to how you look at people with criminal pasts. Here's Quan. You know what I want to do? I want to dispel a myth that once bad, always bad. And I was a police officer for over 31 years. And in that time, I met some pretty amazing criminals, really, some really decent human beings. And today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to one of these people. Quan spent, how many years was it, Quan, that you spent in jail?
22.
22 years.
Total of 22.
A total of 22 years in jail. And that was for a killing, a gang killing in 1999, in which Quan shot and killed a man in this gang-related incident in Hollywood, California. And he is a very different person today. Quan now is the author of a book called Sparrow in the Razor Wire. And on his website, I found a wonderful quote. He says, "I wanted to salvage something of my life, despite my failures as a human being." Quan also operates a program called Defy Ventures, and that's a nonprofit to help individuals with criminal past transform themselves through entrepreneurship. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to Quan. And Quan, how do I pronounce your last name?
Huynh.
Okay. Very good. Welcome to Inspire Us, Quan.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm fascinated by your story. It's always nice to hear a story with a happy ending, and yours is one of those stories. I'd like to start off our podcast by asking about your past, because a lot of people don't understand what draws a person to join a gang, what draws a person to join, say, terrorism. There are elements, and they're different, I suppose, for a lot of people. But largely, sometimes being drawn to a gang is looking for connection, looking for someone to accept you. And was that the case for you, Quan? Were you looking for something and you found a gang, or how did that work out?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Provo, Utah. And this was right after we lost our country. My family had relocated out here to the United States. I was just a toddler at the time. So I grew up, our family is Roman Catholic and we were Vietnamese. And in Utah, it's predominantly white and Mormon. And, you know, for the most part, there's wonderful people that live over there. But I did experience what I now know to be racism. And I never felt like I really fit in. So that kind of planted the seeds of me as a little boy, like, you know, in public, like people would poke fun at us or even say things to us. A really big incident happened when I was 8 years old, was when me and my brother were playing in the ditches, and some older kids and some adults, so may have been like their uncles or their fathers, told us to go back to our country. And we, you know, as little kids, we were talking stuff back and forth. We told them to come make us, and they jumped the fence, chased us down, and they shoved my brother down, and they put dirt in his mouth. And I stood there. My brother was like a couple years younger than me, so he's probably like 6 or 5 at the time. And I stood there. I didn't know what to do. So we both walked home crying, and my father, when he found out, told me, you have to protect your family at all costs. Like, how could you let this happen to your younger brother?
Mm.
Um, so he never brought it up again. But I remember I was feeling ashamed, like I let my family down, I let my brother down, I let my father down, and that was just the beginning seeds of, okay, we I have to protect my family against this outside group. My father gets diagnosed with leukemia later that year, and his condition gets worse, and we moved out here to California, where his family lived. So this was the first time I had gone to school with Hispanics and African Americans and Asians and even Vietnamese. But even in that, I didn't feel like I fit in because there were some Vietnamese kids that told me, this is when I think the first wave of the the refugees were coming over. So a lot of them didn't speak English well, and I couldn't speak Vietnamese well. So of course I stuck out, and they poked fun at
Mm.
me, said I was whitewashed, said that I wasn't Vietnamese. So I just never felt like I fit in on either side, and like looking back now, I know as little kids there were plenty of kids just like me that loved me, but I think just isolated incidents that I told myself in my head, and they just stuck out, and then suddenly I'm believing this narrative that I don't fit in, and people don't like me, and so I just grew up with this little belief like that. My father passes away when I was 13, so I didn't have a father figure. No, in our family particularly, nobody really talked about it. Like no one ever asked, "How are you doing? How are you feeling?"
Mm.
And we were just left to figure it out on our own. So that was right before I went into high school. By that time, our family was broke on welfare. My mom finally got a job, and she was never home. And I just started gravitating to other kids on the streets.
That's really tough because, yeah, going to a school and not feeling as though you belong anywhere. And again, to be verbally attacked and called names because you're not associated to one group or another. And kids can be cruel. And did your father pass away after his diagnosis? And so
Yeah, he passed away from leukemia when I was 13.
okay. And that is at a tough age. Losing a parent at any age is very, very difficult. But at 13, when you're looking for a father figure or someone to emulate and your father's not there, I can understand how that would be very difficult for any child to handle. And so, what was it that made you gravitate to a gang? How did that happen?
Well, I get into high school. I ended up hanging out with some certain kids, and then one of my good friends, he had some older brothers. These guys were already, a little bit more already were running on the streets, and I just liked hanging out with them. Like, they had cars, they had pretty women, and it just began this process where we're hanging out, and then we ended up breaking into cars, and then that leads into credit card fraud, and then just my other crimes, and it just goes down this path. By the time I get it into my senior year in high school, uh, my group of friends, one of us had a 22 caliber gun, and we had gone to a party, I think a couple months before, and my friend had got the gun, and there were some skinhead kids at the party that had surrounded us. So when he pulled out the gun, all the kids ran, and then people talked about like our group, and suddenly, for me, it perpetuated. Oh man, people kind of recognizes, and people kind of it adds to our popularity at school, and people were talking about it. And then it was about a couple months after that, some those same skinhead kids had called my house and threatened to kill my mom and my family. I was working at Subway at the time. My younger brother came to my work and told me that some kids had threatened our family. I asked my coworker where, like, if she could draw me a map of where they lived. And in our talk at the time, like, oh yeah, we'll just shoot them up. We'll go and shoot them up. And knowing that none of us ever shot a gun, none of us had been involved in something like that. She draws the map, and they took off. They said, we'll come back at 10 o'clock to pick you up when you get off work. Well, they left and went to a local arcade. They found another kid that knew where one of the skinheads lived. They ended up going over there. My friend went up to the house, knocked on the door, and they opened it, and he ran inside and shot three people.
Mm.
Fortunately, all three people survived, But within a week or two, they arrested all of us, including me, for conspiracy, commit murder, attempted murders. That was when I was 17, and that was right when I got thrown right into juvenile hall. So for inside the jail system, it's here in California, it's split up by race. Like Asians go with Asians, Hispanics over here, blacks over there, whites over there. And so I was like, okay, this is your group now. And a lot of them were gang members, and I just took up a lot of the same gang values. Um, Befriended quite a few of them, and then I was paroled a couple years after that. But by that time, I didn't graduate high school. I did the best I could. Like, okay, I'll just enroll in college, but it never felt like I fit in with society after that moment. Some of my same friends that were inside that from inside jail with me in juvenile hall were also home, and that became the core of our gang later on. Like we gravitated towards each other, and it just became our gang, and then it just spiraled out of control after that, and culminating in I got arrested 2 times after that for gang violations, gun violations, and ultimately for murder in 1999.
Hmm. There is a progression there. We can certainly see it. And I'm quite certain that a lot of young people have similar stories. The gang members here, I know in Toronto, we have a problem with gangs and young people who are just gravitating to that for a number of different reasons, as you just explained. I could see how the progression of that from being bullied and being targeted to not finding yourself fitting in a particular group to then gravitating towards people who maybe provide you with that acceptance and that welcomeness. And that's how it can lead to what you've just described. And ultimately, in your case, it led to a killing in 1999. You spent 22 years of your precious life behind bars. Can you tell us what that experience was like, and how did you change that heart? Because I think your heart got really angry, and it became a violent heart. And how did that
Yeah,
violent heart turn into something soft?
yeah, it was very violent. It was very angry. It's funny because I had no clue that I was angry. I never thought I was angry. I thought the angry person is the one that's screaming and yelling, but because when I got quiet and I just didn't show any emotions, I thought that was normal, and I just
Mhm.
stuffed it all down. So I commit the murder in 1999. I shot and killed another human being by the name of Min Nguyen at after an altercation at a Hollywood nightclub between our gang and a different gang. We followed them on a freeway. I orchestrated following them. I think we followed them for about 20 miles before we pulled up alongside, and I ended up shooting into the car, shooting and killing one person and injuring 2 others in that car. The next day, I found out somebody died, so I just got rid of my gun. I told everyone in the car, "Don't talk about it." It was a few months after that I was arrested, and they tried me for the death penalty. So I was ultimately found guilty of second-degree murder only because I had got rid of evidence, only because I coached witnesses. Like under the letter of law, I should have been given the death penalty. So I went into prison with a 15-year to life sentence. But in the state of California at the time, it was the same thing as a death sentence because they were not paroling any lifers. They had not paroled a single lifer since 1977.
Mm.
So I just thought, okay, that's it. I'm washed up. And so I just carried that same mentality into prison. No remorse. Like I justified it in my mind, thinking, okay, this is something I had to do. It's my life or theirs. Never once like looking at my own sense of responsibility in this, or how did this come about, and never even looking at myself as somebody violent. And I was extremely violent. So that's how I just lived my life for about 10 years into my life sentence. Still getting involved with the prison gangs, still getting involved with contraband and just the whole black market of prison. It was about the 10th or 12th year of my prison sentence, though, is when several things happened. My niece was born, and it's my brother's daughter, and he sent in a picture of her, and she looked like a spitting image of him, except that she's a girl. And it just took me back to childhood. And then I go, well, how did my life end up like this? Like me and him were just little kids and we were innocent. Like what happened here? And it started making me question. My grandfather passes away that same year. And that took me back to thinking about my father. And one other thing is that I've always been a bookworm. So inside prison, I was still reading. I've always been fascinated with business books and entrepreneurship, and then but those books led me from one book to another, and I got into character development, and then somehow I ended up stumbling on the books of the saints, and particularly stories about saints that had failed in some way in their lives, but yet they were able to turn things around. And I gravitated toward these stories. So, my head became filled with, wow, how did they do this? And what's going on? And so between that and just thinking of about like questioning my own life and how things ended up, it was one day on the prison yard. It was early in the morning. I was standing at the fence, and then I just like asked myself, like, why does prison have to be punishment? Why can't I view this as a place I can remake myself into a better person,
Mm.
look for a way to leave a legacy in here, even if I'm supposed to die? And then I realized I could. So it's just that small shift in my thinking. It made all the difference in the world. Like, the sun was coming up over the hills that morning. I was able to feel its warmth. In the little blades of grass, I could see the individual drops of dew. And up above me in the razor wire, I heard a sparrow chirping. And I tell everyone it had been chirping my whole term, and I never once heard it. But that day I heard it, and I would have to say, like, from that day, like, prison no longer was this cold, harsh, ugly place. It was like a place where I felt like I could connect with other human beings. All of us were on our journeys, many of them much further along than me, and many of them perhaps not even awakened yet. But I just saw it as like, this is a journey we're all on, and we could find ourselves here. And that's how I just begin to approach each day, you know, like basically waking up each morning, like, what does the universe have in store for me to learn today? What can I make myself better in what way today? That's when I began to grieve my father's death. I went to go see a therapist, and what's that? 25 years later, that's when I began to grieve his death. And I realized all around me, men were also grieving their own forms of loss, whether that's family members that have moved on, family members that have died, or loved ones that have left them, or just being transferred prisons and losing friendships that they had built up over the years. And I saw it all around me. So I actually put together a syllabus and proposed it to the prison psychologist. He loved it. And we created the prison's first ever grief and loss group. And
Mm.
that's when I started seeing, like, okay, I could actually make a difference in this world. And that just began, like, I get involved with victims awareness groups, and then understanding about restorative justice principles. And then it all became a snowball effect of me being able to make a difference in, the world. Like, I go, this is my little corner of the world that nobody knows about. It's forgotten and we're discarded here, but I can make a difference here on this little corner, and I could help these men around me. And that's what I began to do. And then, that just became my way of life. 2015, I went up to the parole board, and they kind of examined like what I had been up to. I shared with how I saw things. I went into the board and owned up to the shooting and said I committed the murder. I lied at trial. This is actually what happened. And then they just came back and said, we feel that you are no longer a threat to society. And that's when they paroled me. Yeah.
Wow. Quan, I don't know where to begin with that incredible story of transition to transformation, receiving a picture of your niece that opens this floodgate to new experiences, to going out and just recognizing the beauty around you, the sparrow in the wire, the blades of grass with dew on it, all these things, reading, your constant reading and becoming interested in the book of saints and what they did and the difficulty they went through. There are so many messages in what you just said that a lot of people take for granted. For the longest time, you didn't know you were angry. You always felt that anger was shouting and screaming and kicking and doing this kind of stuff. And yet you can be angry and not show it. And that just prevents your heart from growing. It really does. You're angry with the world. You did a tremendous self-examination of your life, and you didn't like where it was, and you moved towards making it an incredible testament to who you really are. And I applaud you for that. And you are doing so much good in the world right now to start that movement within the prison, to get men to gather together and to share their losses and be vulnerable with one another. That project, I'm sure, is still going on, is it not?
Well, so what happened is that the psychologist got transferred, so they shut it down without a staff to sponsor it. Like, there were budget cuts, so then that did not happen. But then seeing that made me realize, where else can I start to make a difference? So even understanding, like, the loss of, a grieving process, and then applying that into other groups that I got involved with. Like, I was involved with this organization called the Alternatives to Violence Project, the victims awareness, of course, and then, like, getting, like, the men to realize, like, the harm that they caused, and getting them to accept it. That was the challenging part, because a lot of them were just like me many years, just making excuses and justifying it. And then I also tied right into line with, and in the California prison system, when a life term prisoner goes to the parole board, they're issued a parole hearing transcript, and it's exactly what happens in there. For some reason, the culture of prison, men never shared these transcripts. Like, it's almost like people hold on to it, and they tell the story. They come out of the parole board, you get screwed. They were so evil in there. They'll never let any of us go home. One of my friends that we were just sitting together, suddenly one day says, here, read my transcripts. He gave me 7 of them. That means he had gone to 7 hearings. And as I read it, it opened my eyes to when I'm reading it. And then I somehow I had to stop, like, I know why you're not getting paroled. And so we sat down and we started going through, like, at the same time, like, everything just seemed like it's all pointed towards me helping and me understanding. And I started coaching him, like, hey, this is where you're not owning this. This is where you are not taking any responsibility. This is where you're not making any type of amends, and you haven't owned this crime. And he goes, what do you mean? I said I did it. But I go, but you're still making an excuse of why. You're still making excuses in this. What's so bad if you just own this? So when people saw, like, what are you and Quan doing? He tells them, oh, Quan's helping me prepare for the parole board. People thought we were crazy, because they're like, how can Quan help you? He's never gone to the parole board. He's only been in prison 10, 12 years. We've been in here 30 years. What does this guy know? Well, one of my other friends also was sitting there. He went to the parole board. He ends up with a parole date. And that's when just the floodgates open, where men suddenly, oh, what, they're onto something. And they started sitting down with me. But I realized they want to sit down with me because they want to go home. But which is fine, but my motive is, you know what? I've already found this amazing freedom in here. Let me shift their mind and their heart in these sessions without them having to know it. But then the byproduct of it is them going to parole board and owning everything. But I go, it's not these words I'm giving them. It's more a change of heart and mind. And that's what I want to get them to. And so that's just, fumbling my way through it and understanding what they're saying and what's actually happening in the parole board and what they say happen. They're 2 different things. And I saw it over and over, and I just realized this is a human tendency to not cast ourselves in a bad light and always spin it in a way that makes it still look good. And then it made me re-examine my own life. Like, where am I telling myself this false narrative? And where am I not being honest with myself and the world, and not being authentic? And everything just started tying in together with books I was reading, men I was able to help coach. And yeah, so I think, like, over that time, I would say I helped maybe 9, 10, 12 men get found suitable and go home, which is not an insignificant amount. But I also realized that what I understood in there gave me so much freedom. And even the men that I didn't help to go home, they also had a sense of freedom. So that was, like, a lot of my motivation for writing this book. Like, this is where I can help out those that are left behind to perhaps realize there's a different way of looking at this.
I like that. There's a lot of things that you said that hit, I think, for a lot of people here. One of the things is that, yes, we do have a tendency of not wanting to be seen in a poor light. So if you're in an argument with someone, perhaps a significant other or whatever, and you don't take full responsibility for what you've said or done, you make excuses. That does not repair the relationship. In fact, it just
Mhm.
pushes people further behind. And as you said, once you begin to take accountability, there's transformation that can take place. Another thing that you were saying is that the kind of hit with me is that you found freedom within the prison, a place that you had been sent to be punished. You actually
Mhm.
found a freedom and a purpose.
Mhm.
A lot of people during COVID-19 are feeling as though they are in prison because many cannot leave home. And, and instead of feeling victimized and traumatized by not being able to leave home, perhaps there are different ways of being creative, as Quan, you have demonstrated. It is not your surroundings that creates your prison. It is what you think your prison is that creates your prison. Your surroundings don't have to define whether you are free or whether you are imprisoned. It is what your mind tells you. Your mind found a liberation and a purpose that led you to become the man that you are and to have helped so many people. And when you left, you started a program. You became that entrepreneur after having studied all those books on entrepreneurship. How long did it take after you left prison to become an entrepreneur? Was it 6 months?
Yeah. So the organization that I work for, Defy Ventures, like you said, it's a program that helps men and women with criminal histories to transform their lives through the journey of entrepreneurship. Um, it was that program came to our prison right before I paroled. It was a pilot program, and I saw it. I go, wow, entrepreneurship. This is speaking my language right here, and so I signed up for it. It was weird because most prison programs, all you do is just sign your name on a piece of paper and you put your prison number and they'll call you in, you're part of the program. This one was like you had to fill out a 30-page application, write like what entrepreneurship means, why your life has transformed, and why you want to join the program. So everything about it just resonated with me. So I was part of the program. I was found suitable and paroled before I even graduated from the program. I continued with the program out here. 6 months after is when I had created my first company. It's a commercial cleaning company, and yeah, it's still running to this day.
Hmm.
I have 7 employees. 5 of them are also formerly incarcerated, and I tell you, like those are my best workers. Like, yeah.
Wow. That is just a beautiful story of transformation and of finding purpose and of action that a lot of people certainly need to hear. And I hope that this podcast gets broadcasted to people who may be struggling with taking ownership for some of the things that they've done. Well, wouldn't it be nice if this was broadcasted in prison? I would like to ask you about that sparrow in the razor wire. Why don't you tell us what prompted you to write a book? And I think I know why you picked that title, but why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, when I was writing the book, I didn't have a title at first, and it was about like 40% into the writing process when the story started coming together, and then it was when I was writing just that incident, and I go, "This is the title of my book." So the sparrows in there, um, they, if in prison because of the razor wire, a lot of the sparrows, if you look closely, they're disfigured. A lot of them, like as babies, they'll land on the razor wire wrong, and they'll lose a limb, they'll lose a claw. Some of them are scarred. So I after that it was I always noticed them after that. They just all were always like, you know what? They're scarred, they're deformed, and yet they're still free, and yet they're still singing. And here they are in prison with us.
Hmm.
So I just looked at, hey, that's how we are, right? Like we're scarred and deformed to the outside world. We're lepers to the outside world, but we could also be like these sparrows. So that's just how I looked at it.
That's a very beautiful way of looking at things. And throughout our conversation, even our first call together, I noticed that you have a wonderful way of seeing things. You see the details that a lot of us miss. And I think if we look for those details, we can find the beauty around us, no matter what our circumstances are. So thank you for reminding us that when you look you know, at things like you looked at the sparrow and the razor wire, you see things that remind you or get you thinking about something that is not ugly, something that is beautiful in whatever you have. So, no, that's a great reminder. Is your book is it a biography of your life, or is it?
It's a memoir, so it's written for men that are doing a long or life-term sentences.
Okay.
That was my original, my dedication for very first dedication is to the men I left behind. So it's written for men that are doing long or lifetime sentences, and in it, I'm sharing with them like this is how I came to my own sense of freedom years before I was paroled from my life sentence. But it's funny because a byproduct of writing it for them, I've been given quite overwhelming feedback from a lot of people that have read it out here, and they said, your book is more than just for people in prison. Like we all live in prisons in some way,
Mm.
um, and your book has made me re-examine my own narrative and things I'm not taking personal responsibility for out here. So that's also been great to hear, great feedback. Yeah, and just random people. Like just last week, there was a woman that read my book, was so moved by it, and she said like it made her really, it inspired her to even like challenge her own thinking. And she goes, if this book right here is already making me, moving me to like uh, re-examine my own life like this, I could only imagine what it would do for men in prison. So she reaches out to me through my website and said, "Hey, I just read your book. This is what happened. I'd like to do a fundraiser to get more of your books into prison."
Ah,
So we put something together. It was funny because her original goal was 220 books to go into prison, 22 to signify the amount of years that I've been in prison. And then she got some amazing artists to also draw up some postcards to also include inside it. She ended up raising 400, enough to bring 400 books into prison. And then she also decides that she's also going to purchase another 110 to give on top of that. So I said, man, then how about this? And I will match all of that. So this will be like over 1,000 human beings that are incarcerated that we're going to be able to get this book into. Hopefully, it will spark some change for some people. So
oh, I'm certain it will because yes, your book it talks about people on the inside, but as this reader pointed out so accurately, is that we all have prisons of our own making. A lot of people are living as hostages to themselves. I have a book. My first book was called "Hostage to Myself," in which we take ourselves hostage, and the only people who can liberate us, as you have pointed out, is ourselves. And that's what you did. You liberated yourself. If you had a message to share, well, and you do have a message to share, what would you share with people who are perhaps struggling with their own identity, with their anger issues, or even with their criminal behavior? What would you share to these people?
I would tell them they are not the worst thing that they have done. I mean, I say it all the time is that I believe uh, all human beings are salvageable, and I think like I believe in the human capacity to change it, through their choices at any given moment, no matter how far they've spiraled into something. In my book, my chapter two, the very first sentence I says, "I was not born a murderer," and in realizing that in prison, I realized it was a long series of choices that got me to think that it was okay to commit murder. But then in realizing that, I also realized then I could find my way out through making a long series of right choices from here on out. And that's
Right.
just how I approached it. So I think, just for me and for anyone else just struggling, like I think like, okay, yeah, you may be struggling, but now how do you make a choice today to make your life better incrementally, and then tomorrow, and the next day, and then suddenly, um, it builds up its own momentum. That's what I saw all around me when I
Mm.
was in there.
Yeah, and that's very true. First of all, it's the awareness that you want to change, and that's a big one. You know, to recognize, to self-evaluate, like you did in prison. There were a series of events that happened that made you examine yourself and examine where you were going. And although you thought that you may be in prison for the rest of your life, you still did something about that to improve yourself and to improve your circumstances. And you really evolved into who you are today. And I think that's a lot of people have to recognize that sometimes when life is not going well, we just stop, we evaluate, we determine how bad we want the change. And if we want it bad enough, then we take those small steps that end up leading into big steps and gets easier all the time, which is what you've done. So, you know, yours is a very remarkable story of how, although things can go terribly wrong, you can well, you can admit where you went wrong. You can take full responsibility for what you did wrong, and then you can make a change. And you can make a change not only in your own life, but in the lives of other people that surround you. And for your book to get out there, 1,000 copies, way to go! Congratulations!
Mhm.
I hope it. I hope it not only changes 1,000 hearts. I hope it changes 20 times that much, if not more.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's amazing
me
how
too.
one story can make a difference, right?
Hmm.
And yours has made a difference in a lot of people's lives. So thank you very much for that. Now, how can people get a hold of you, Quan? Where can they get a copy of your book? How can they get a hold of you?
They could go right to my website to find me. It's quanxhuyn.com, but I know that might be hard for people to spell out. So you could also just type in Sparrow in the razorwire.com, and it will point right to my website. They could also, yeah, they could get the book there, or they could get the book right off Amazon. It's a Sparrow in the Razor Wire.
And I will leave the link in the bio that I provide along with this episode. So, Quan, thank you so much. Isn't this interesting? Former hostage negotiator and detective talking to someone who spent 22 years in jail. But you know, and here we are, fast friends. And I've had more, you know, friends who had criminal backgrounds as well, because you're absolutely right. People can change and people can improve their lives, and they can go on to do some incredible things, as you have yourself. You are a living testament that change can happen, and that, as I said, right from the very beginning of this podcast, let's dispel the myth that once bad, always bad. Quan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another insightful episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and leave your comments. For more information, check out our website at www.inspireus.ca. Remember, it's not what happens to us that matters most. It's how we respond to what happens to us that does. Stay strong and resilient.